Hi guys. We left off last time, chapter 12, at the end of key issue 3. So we're going to start off with key issue 4 today. Why do services cluster in settlements? So first we're going to talk about services in rural settlements. And rural settlements tend to take one of two forms. So the first kind is a clustered rural settlement. And these are agricultural-based communities, and these are when a number of families live in close proximity to each other. They have fields surrounding the collection of houses and farm buildings. They typically have homes, barns, tool sheds, and some type of consumer services, like religious structures, schools, and shops. Then the other type of rural settlements are dispersed rural settlements. And these are typical of North American rural settlements, and they're characterized by farmers living on individual farms, and they're isolated from their neighbors. So if you think about farms, particularly those in Kentucky, they tend to have a large amount of acreage, and people are really far away from their neighbors. So your closest neighbor might be a couple miles away. So here we can see a clustered colonial American settlement, and this is in Newfane, Vermont. It includes a courthouse, church buildings, and they're clustered around a central, what's called a commons. And then this is a dispersed rural settlement, and this is in Wisconsin. So you have one family that is living there, and then they're surrounded by all their acreage. So the next family might not be for miles away. Excuse me. So what about services in early settlements? Well, early consumer services started with places to bury the dead. Religious leaders were stationed at burial sites to perform the service of saying prayers for the deceased. They likely encouraged the building of more permanent structures for ceremonies and dwellings. Then there were manufacturing centers. Early public services were primarily tasked with offering protection to everyone in the settlement. They built walls around the settlement for protection, and then there were some type of defenders, usually soldiers. Early business services, we have settlements that the settlement served as a neutral ground where several groups could safely come together to trade goods and other services. Officials in the settlement provided some type of producer services, like they regulated the terms of transactions, they set fair prices, they kept records, and they created a currency system. So let's talk about urbanization. The very earliest of urban settlements, prehistoric. The earliest urban settlements were probably in the Fertile Crescent of Southwest Asia and North Africa. So Fertile Crescent, we're talking about Mesopotamia, and the oldest of these was Ur, and this is present-day Iraq. So you probably remember or recognize this from WAP. So this is the prehistoric urban settlement, Ur. This is the remains of Ur in present-day Iraq, and this provides us with evidence of early urban civilization. Ancient Ur was compact, perhaps covering only 100 hectares, and which is about 250 acres, and it was surrounded by a wall. So we have that defense system. The most prominent building, the stepped temple, which is called a ziggurat, was originally constructed around 4,000 years ago. And the ziggurat was originally a 3-story structure with a base that was 64 by 46 meters, or 210 by 150 feet. The upper stories stepped back. 4 more stories were added in the 6th century BC. Surrounding the ziggurat was a dense network of small residences built around courtyards and opening into narrow passageways. And the excavation site was damaged during the 2 wars in Iraq. So that was prehistoric. Let's look at some ancient urban settlements. The settlements first established in the eastern Mediterranean about 2500 BC. And the first is Knossos on the island of Crete. Then we have Troy in Asia Minor, which is we now refer to as Turkey. And then we have Mycenae in Greece. So the aforementioned urban settlements were primarily trading centers and organized into city-states. And city-states are independent, self-governing communities that included the settlement and the nearby countryside. So Athens was the largest city-state in Greece, and Rome was believed to have grown to a population between 250,000 and 1 million. So if we look right here, so here on the map, we have the Tigris and the Euphrates coming together in the Fertile Crescent. So here's so that's what we refer to as Mesopotamia. And this shows us the largest urban settlements in prehistoric times. And then you probably talked about Thebes and Memphis in WAP. We have the Nile River Valley and the delta there. So these are the earliest known large urban settlements, and these are in the Fertile Crescent of Southwest Asia and in Egypt. Okay, so we've looked at prehistoric, we've looked at ancient, now we're on to medieval urban settlements. So during the medieval time, we have a dense network of small market towns, and these serve the needs of particular lords, and they cover much of Europe. So remember, during this time period, after the fall of the Roman Empire, the feudal system is existing in medieval Europe, and because of that, the system of protection is much different. And so we have lords who are acting as protectors and also landowners in Europe. So the largest medieval European settlements served as power centers for these lords and as power centers for church leaders, and they also were major market centers. So the tallest and most elaborate structures were usually churches, and they were usually surrounded by walls. So there's going to be a rapid growth of urban settlements. And the process by which the population of urban settlements grows is known as urbanization. And urbanization has two dimensions. First, an increase in the number of people living in urban settlements. So that is an increase in the number of people. And developing countries have 8 of the 10 most populous cities. Okay, number 2, the second dimension of urbanization is an increase in the percentage of people living in urban settlements. So the percentage of people living in the urban settlements has increased from 3% in 1800 to 6% in 1850, 14% in 1900, 30% in 1950, and 47% in 2000. And then we can see the difference between developed and developing countries, that in developed countries, 3/4 of the population is urbanized, and in developing countries, 2/5 of the population is urbanized. So if we look at this map, this shows us the percentage of people living in urban settlements. And we can see that developed countries have higher percentages of urban residents than do developing countries. So the darkest shade of yellowy orange, which is 75% and above, 75% of the population and above are living in urban settlements. Okay, this next map shows us urban settlements with at least 2 million inhabitants. So most of the world's largest urban settlements are in developing countries, especially in East Asia, South Asia, and Latin America. So this map shows us urban settlements with at least 2 million people, and the purple dots are 10 million people and above. The red dots are 5 million to 9.9 million people. The orange dots are 3 million to 4.9 million people. The yellow dots are 2 million to 2.9 million people. So let's see, if you look for the purple dots, Delhi, Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, Guangzhou, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Los Angeles. So definitely places we think of having lots of people. Okay, to summarize, most jobs are in the service sector, especially in developed countries. Consumer services generally follow a regular pattern based on size of settlements. Business services disproportionately cluster in a handful of urban settlements. Services cluster in both rural and urban settlements as a function of market areas, ranges, and thresholds which are integral to central place theory. The end.